All right. I don't know if it's going to LinkedIn for whatever reason, but it's going to YouTube. But we
It's
are
not
live.
because I deleted the LinkedIn event 2 weeks ago and I didn't want to recreate
Uh,
this. So hello, everyone. We're
hello,
here on
hello.
YouTube.
In case you're trying to find us and you found us here on YouTube, welcome to YouTube. Welcome back. Good to see you all. Happy New Year, by the way. We can still say that because this is the first episode to kick off the new year, even though we're into February. So welcome back. Hope everyone had a wonderful break and holiday season and got to enjoy it and decompress a little bit. We're off to the races here in 2025. It's been an interesting start in January, and we'll see what February has in store for us. We have a great episode for you today, focused on the topic, like we promised last time, on super babies and what babies and how we're going to be able to tap into different techniques to alter our DNA and the DNA potentially of our offspring to make evolutionary changes. So as genetic engineering continues to advance and we face unprecedented power to design our children and the future of the human race in its entirety, the question is, will we create a whole new species of enhanced humans in a beneficial way? Are we playing God? Are we taking control of our evolution? What are the downsides? And what happens when some can afford perfect children while others can't afford perfect children? What are the moral constraints surrounding all of this? Where will it take us? That's what we're going to really dive in today. This is a very interesting topic because DNA has been kind of one of those forefront technologies, I think, in sciences that we've struggled with for a very long time. And just over the last quarter century, have we really been able to tap into it and really better understand and map human DNA? It's told us a lot about ourselves and a lot about our origins and a lot about what we can do as well. And it's going to be very interesting given some of the advancements that we're starting to see over just the last couple of years, even some recently, where we can make permanent alterations to our DNA, maybe to prevent disease or change different outcomes in regards to disabilities that a child might have, as well as maybe enhance a child to have better evolutionary traits than we do currently today. They could have advantages in real life or sports or in intelligence or living on Mars, like we were just talking about before we jumped on. It's kind of a limitless area. We don't know where it will take us, but we're going to explore all those possibilities and potentialities today. Sam, anything you want to add to that intro as well in regards to this topic of super babies?
I mean, like most things that we discuss on this show, when we framed it as the most pressing and provocative questions shaping our future and present, this is a pretty provocative topic. You know, it starts to teeter on the verge of conversations around things like evolution or things like eugenics and movements that have in the past and the present, right, are problematic and concerning and tough to discuss. So it's something not like disclosure, welcome to the show, everything we talk about will probably make you uncomfortable. But, you know, it's one of these things that it for me, it's one of the hardest topics to personally grapple with, these types of decisions, especially as we have more and more awareness and autonomy over, even just basic awareness, right? Understanding what not only DNA is, but being able to use commercial services like, let's say, 23andMe or others to actually understand your like genetic code and other metadata around that or predispositions, and that we actually have access to that. And we're learning more and more. So we're really in this unique time where we are on the cusp of a number of different technologies that can not only raise the awareness of how we work. You know, we're always trying to figure that out, whether it's on a biological level, a neurochemical level, a metaphysical level, like what's going on. Well, you know, that's sort of the questions of science. But when we start talking about now we think we know what's going on, let's start tinkering with it. These are where some of the bigger questions come in. I guess I can go a little, not so much in the grand history of things, but just to lay the groundwork. The idea of genetic selection or editing is not something, I'd say editing, or what we're going to be discussing on the episode, is new, right? There are scientific approaches, a lot of things we'll talk about that are new, but selecting in like ancient times, things like selective breeding and people, like whether we're talking about human beings or even plants or animals or what have you, there have been practices that have existed for quite some time. So equally as provocative then as it is now. But now we're really talking about doing this in a precise manner at scale. And what are these things that people are discussing or thinking about selecting for, whether that's aesthetic reasons, such as eye color or skin color. I can't even say this because it sounds blatantly like, for me, uncomfortable, or things like diseases, right? And who are we to, start selecting some of those out of a gene pool? What could happen if we do that? Do new things emerge? And then, as you mentioned, things beyond that. Will we need to survive our changing planet? Will our atmosphere start to shift in a way that we need to evolve, or do we go to other planets where we might need to switch on and off a few genes and basically create a new species?
I think it's kind of weird for people. It's weird for myself to kind of try and wrap my head around it sometimes as well, when you think about the ability to kind of control the direction of your evolution. Because most people, we think of it as, natural selection. If you have the right traits and it's survival of the fittest, the ones with the best traits will pass on those traits to their offspring and replicate over and over again. And that's how we kind of look at it. It's something that's like a nature given, God given type of element that's supposed to be out of human control, that, just in the last, again, like 20, 30 years, we've been able to really be able to take advantage of. I believe CRISPR was first discovered as a solution to edit DNA like in 1987. So it's not something that's, just evolved recently. And then the ability to, actually do this in a lab with CRISPR Cas9, I think was in like 2011, and was, I think, really well put together in 2013. And that's when people really started looking into the ability to, edit DNA for different reasons. I remember they actually used CRISPR to treat sickle cell in the US as well. I think that was one of the first successful cases where they were able to take a disorder, blood cell disorder, that is really common in the US for a lot of people, and be able to actually treat it in certain controlled situations. But it opened up this door for what people could potentially do to help people, but also, opens up the door, like, what else can you do with DNA? As we better map this stuff out, we're starting to figure out where these gene switches are, right? Which genes code for eye color, which ones code for hair color. And then this industry starts to evolve where people say, hey, what if we can decide if we don't want our baby to have red hair, we want our baby to have blonde hair. If we want our baby to be preconditioned to be really good at the piano, or to have fast twitch muscle fibers to be able to excel in certain types of sports, has opened up this entire conversation on being able to, again, design your own baby, which is where this topic of super babies comes from. And I want to pull up one of these articles, because I think it, actually highlights really well how far we've come with this, and also kind of how eerie it is in a sense, with what we're starting to do. One of them being lab-grown sperm and eggs. I didn't even think it was something that was possible. It's a little weird to talk about, but now is a reality. Like, this was an article published back in May of last year, talking about being able to reset human cells in a certain way to dictate, how you want a baby to develop. Sam, do you want to talk on this article a little bit? I know you sent this to me just the last
I was
day.
doing deeper research on, because it was republished recently on the 26th of January by The Guardian that the technology for these lab grown eggs is on the brink of viability, at least this watchdog group in the UK. And they've been able to do it in mice, including either creating a baby mouse with either simply one biological father or one biological mother. I mean, I'm not on the level of a geneticist or like knowing directly how this works, other than taking fragments of kind of one of the, I guess, traditional parents, right? Whether it's the sperm or the egg, and being able to create the alternative from just the single strand of DNA. And a lot of the, I guess, the ethical or regulatory discussions around it, from what I saw, are generally around, is this going to mess up the gene pool, right? If you have the ability to create some lab grown, genetic material, you're making something super specific, especially coming from just one person, right? We don't have that mixing that occurs where, again, certain qualities either proliferate in the gene pool or kind of evolve out of it. So that was really like the question there. Yeah. So these articles were more around like just the kind of ethical and legal issues, not here's how we do it. Here's how you can go do it. And again, for me, this was more, it was a recent thing. Again, just like the getting close to this being viable, not to say that this will be done in society, certainly not in the UK. I would not assume the UK or any of the countries in the European Union would be like on the forefront of this. I wouldn't be surprised if we were to do more research. In China, of course, the Chinese were pretty far ahead with CRISPR and other technologies, and not really having a regulatory environment around that. The US seems to be, I wouldn't say favorable, but at least what I see, more open to innovation in these areas, including specifically as it relates to reproductive technologies like IVF or in vitro fertilization, which does bring up similar types of ethical questions and where these types of technologies likely would be used in the future. So, coming from a US centric perspective, at least myself, and seeing things like this, I think it's within the realm of possibility of being something that we could very well see in policy discussions or even future elections or things like that, where, for so long there's debate. We see debates around things like pro-life or pro-choice, like abortion, and of course the reproductive rights discussions. But I think, again, I wouldn't be surprised in the coming years if we start seeing things that right now that seems so ridiculous to me to be like, how is this even a news article? But it could, it's very well close to being something that's a very real discussion.
It's very fascinating, because I think it's something that may actually transcend politics at some point. It feels like something that would just come onto the open market as something people would want to pay for. But again, it bumps up against this moral idea of, having a child is supposed to be special, going through that process and creating it on your own, or even adopting, like being able to create something in a lab or even put it in a test tube, and even, I don't know the word, but grow the baby in an artificial womb. It opens up all these doors where I can see the benefits, especially for a woman, especially for any couple that at some point could be identified to be predisposed to having a child that could have an issue at some point. Like maybe one of the parents has a long history of smoking or something, tobacco, or maybe the father was an alcoholic in his past life or something. Like there's a lot of things that your parents do that unfortunately affect your DNA and what goes into making you who you are in that creation process, and can unfortunately unravel throughout development. And nobody wants to go through that. Having a baby that has those issues and, feeling responsible for that, and then your baby having to live with some of those problems. So I can see where some of these solutions come into play. It's just also kind of weird, again, to think about it like that. Like we joke about in cartoons and science fiction. There's so many different movies about this kind of stuff too. And growing a baby in a test tube to fruition. So there's a whole moral side of it that I think will be interesting for people to debate, that probably will go beyond the political side of it. But we'll just be like, should we do this? Like, what are the repercussions? How will this affect our DNA, which is very delicate? And we don't, again, are we supposed to be playing God? What kind of repercussions will that have long-term on the human race? If we make certain changes that we can't really verify their effects until 40, 50 years later. It's a whole new area that we haven't fully explored. And it's honestly like 10 years old at the latest.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these things again, where it's on the line of the scary stuff, like human experimentation or eugenics and other topics we've discussed, whether they are biohacking movements focused on longevity, like living forever, or things like this, like editing genes or selecting designer babies. Yeah, for me, I mean, these are some of the hardest topics, and I don't want to come off as someone who's just like, I'm against all of it. It would kind of go not be in line with some of my role, right, as working with so many people as a futurist, is to educate and share these things. And I try really hard not to bring so much of my opinion, my personal opinion, into topics when I'm educating, because they're simply like, here's what's happening and here are the facts. And then there's, okay, what do we think about it? Let's have a discussion. I will say that with a lot of these topics over the years, and for whatever reason, whether it's something that I'm personally doing or meet someone who has made a different choice in their life, or they've had something that they've had to overcome and made a choice in that way, my personal opinions continue to evolve, and things that in the past, I think through any historical epoch, new technologies are terrifying to people, right? They're scary. We think, what will happen? Oh my goodness, are we going to like unleash mutant human beings? Are we going to create disease, new genetic diseases that we didn't foresee because we decide to start creating basically like the dog breeds of humans, right? Because what we're implying here with genetic, gene editing or enhancement, or essentially designing a human being or engineering something that is, in my opinion, already very sophisticated. I wouldn't say perfectly engineered, but again, that's where belief systems and spiritual or religious disciplines or scientific disciplines might have beliefs around that, saying that we are, perfectly engineered. Why are we messing with this? It could be quite dangerous. And on the flip side, it's saying that's our right as human beings and creators as well, and creatives, to be able to continue to evolve and advance. With any technology this powerful, whether we're talking about communication technologies like the internet, or we're talking about like genetic data, it's pretty much anything right now. Is so powerful that I come back to who has access to it, who's deciding what we are enhancing or not, who owns that, who owns the genetic data, what companies are doing it, what is their governance, what do we as a society start to prioritize as being valuable. And that's when we again get into this dangerous territory of, you say, well, this type of quality is better than that one, right? Who determines that? Where does that come from?
What if they watermark our DNA and our baby grows up to be predisposed to preferring Geico over Progressive?
Stop. We're going, I mean, that is fully within the realm of possibility if you're predisposed to certain
I
almost
mean,
like
it kind of gets into
tags.
the next topic that we have outlined in terms of cognitive engineering. I don't
Hmm.
know how, that'll work exactly. Again, one of the frontiers of human biology that isn't fully understood yet is the cognitive mind and the brain itself, and the neurosystem generally, and how it interacts with the body. But from a mental faculty standpoint, it could have profound effects as well. The brain is very has a lot of plasticity and adaptability, and so it's hard to really map with direct certainty. But there's things that could be done in genetic engineering to maybe give someone a larger or more profound frontal lobe. So maybe they're more uh, in tune to taking the SAT or the ACT to get into college. Maybe there's certain things that could be done from a structural standpoint that could give someone an advantage. In terms of planting an idea, like we're getting into like the realm of like inception and stuff like that. I don't know if there's like a physiological aspect that can or cannot affect that. But it's things you got to worry about when you bring in like the commercial side of it. I wouldn't put it off for a company not to try and do that at some point, and never knowing that they did it until like 100 years later, when everyone's 90% of people choose Geico over Progressive for some reason, and they finally link it back to CRISPR. It's again, it's one of those moral quandaries that I think at some point, we do have to think about, like who are we putting this in the hands of? If you go all the way back to World War II, Nazi Germany was already practicing eugenics and racial cleansing. It's something that's happened for a very long time, like before we even had the ability to, mess with our DNA. Can you imagine if Nazis had the ability to do it back then? Would be an absolute disaster. So I don't know. There's a lot of good people in the world, but there's people out there that have questionable intentions, and this stuff could be used for slightly nefarious purposes at some point. Or to try and dictate an outcome, or even someone just, not being well educated and maybe disrupting our DNA entirely. And then in 40, 50 years, all of a sudden, all of our kids have 3 arms and they don't need 3 arms. Or everyone's hair is blonde, and now we don't have anyone with a diverse hair color, and it's lost from our DNA profile, so we can't get it back. But that's like a simple case, but there's potentially larger cases that could be more important. Like we breed ourselves out of being able to reproduce naturally. That's something that's already happening naturally at a biological level for a lot of people across the world, and is a huge issue that kind of plays into this whole topic of population rates, birth rates and repopulation rates. So there's little changes that we could make tampering with some of this stuff that could be profoundly bad at the same time. And just kind of spinning off in multiple directions here, but again, it just kind of opens up these possibilities that I think are interesting to talk about. Because we talk about the benefits and what we can do, and the idea of designing a baby and designing a perfect human being. But again, we're playing with something that is supposed to be reserved for God, supposed to be reserved for nature itself. And who knows where that takes us? Like, we might mess it up. Humans mess things up all the time.
I think we most certainly will. I mean, it actually, something you said reminded me of, I guess, thinking of like a parallel or historical precedent in terms of commercial use or misuse. It reminded me of seeds and the company or conglomerate Monsanto, which is now was acquired by Bayer, the pharmaceutical or chemical company. If I said this company's word, like even 5 or 10 years ago, you'd be like, you're a conspiracy theorist. It was sort of one of these things where like, oh my goodness. But, they did develop technology of these seeds, right? Annual seeds. So basically you could only plant them once. They would, sell them to farmers, grow your crops, whether it's corn or soybeans or what have you. And it will grow for one season, but not produce seeds so that you can, germinate on its own. You have to buy more from the company, and, everything that comes with that, whether that's the chemical fertilizers. And that got us into this whole kind of realm of genetically modified foods. if I were to think of like the path that took with just foods and seeds and apply it to a potential path, not saying likely, not saying this has already happened, but just a potential path if we were to do this to humans, then I could see someone at some time in some room somewhere being like, hey, yeah, let's actually make it so that humans they can only reproduce through, our technologically verified matched egg and sperm that's been tested, and it has to happen in this external womb or whatever the heck. I might have even written like a little science fiction about this at some point when I was inspired by this conversation. It's quite scary, but I think there could be almost a confluence of things that are happening in the world right now. On one hand, there's the fears around stagnation or even decline in population growth in some or many Western countries, with majority of the population being, 60 or 65 plus older, but not meeting the replacement rate. And then meanwhile, there are other people arguing we're overpopulated and past the carrying capacity of the planet. But besides these things, these arguments, there is, it seems that there is I wouldn't go so far as a fertility crisis, though some people might use that language. It's very fear-based, but there are questions that people are asking at the moment, like why it's beyond just people waiting longer to start families. At least, again, the discourse in the US of like, why are people struggling? Why are couples ending up needing reproductive technologies or IVF? Is there something else about our modern society or culture that could have led to this, whether that's disruptions to the endocrine system, whether that's the food system, the water, birth control?
There's an interesting correlation with that in the rise of pet owners too.
Yeah, I know. And yeah, the obsession, the pet propaganda. I don't know what that was. That's a massive industry of all the pet parents. I love pets. But there could be a moment where we're seeing a potential for things like what happened with seeds to like sort of creep its way into the collective consciousness around human reproduction. And it could be positioned in such a way like this is just, it's better. And there are a lot of really cool things, right? It took me a while for me personally to wrap my head around even those basic things. I'm quite like a naturalist when it comes to many things in my life. But when you do think of, let's just say, basic genetic testing, I'm not saying editing, not saying making decisions based on it, but, let's say two people are carriers for something, and you're aware of that and can prevent that from happening. I think that's pretty cool. I have a cousin with cystic fibrosis. And, I'm not a carrier of this, but the reason for her that she had it is her parents obviously were carriers and weren't aware. And it's been a very difficult life for her. I mean, she's a remarkable human being and really, goes through a lot having this. But, there's not been a lot of research in treating that genetic disease or many others. And it's kind of interesting now, at least people can screen for that. So in that respect, I'm kind of like, I'm not like, where is the line between screening and then like starting to make selections and editing? And then again, the question of where does life begin? Right? I mean, is it like, as you mentioned, playing God, if life begins at a point, are we getting in there and making decisions that shouldn't be our own to make?
I think that'll be the $1 million question for people to ask as this industry continues to get better. There's a couple of things you touched on that I want to go back to, on the disease and disorder side of things. Again, there's lots of benefits between different blood disorders and cancers and neurodegenerative conditions, that can come out of being able to make these alterations to DNA. And if anyone doesn't fully understand what CRISPR is, it's essentially cut, copy, and paste like on your computer, but for DNA, where you can insert a modified version of a amino sequence and put it into a DNA and then let it replicate into a cell. And then you can replace a trait or fix a trait or turn something on or off, essentially. And it's quite impressive that they can even do that. If you think about it, like I had to look this up, but a human hair, which is already really small, is like 40,000 times larger than a DNA strand. So it's pretty incredible that we can even do that at such a microscopic level. So props to the scientific community for even figuring out how to do that with CRISPR. But again, this is something that also we haven't been doing just in humans, but we've been doing in our own food for a long time too. And I think that's a good way at looking at where, some of the good and bad elements can come. Like obviously we've been able to create, genetically modified plants and crops that are able to grow in harsher environments and that are more nutritious and that are more fruitful in a lot of ways. But we've also learned that they have a lot of negative effects on the body sometimes, or that they can be modified to be more invasive towards other plants, where it might kill everything around it, or it might have other unresolved consequences at some point. And it's not like we haven't played with this stuff before in other levels. And obviously a plant is a little bit easier to genetically modify than the human genome itself. But again, it's something we have to keep an eye out for in the future as we continue to tinker with these things. Another topic beyond the cognitive side of it that I think is really interesting is the physical side of it too. Being able to enhance our super babies to be able to physically do certain things that maybe we can't do or we wish we could do, such as being really good at sports and dance, or being stronger, being faster, or even having better oxygen capabilities in our lungs to breathe longer. Maybe we can dive deeper underwater. Maybe we can tackle obstacles that are difficult for the ordinary human to tackle in ordinary life and in the environment that we currently live in. I think that's another fascinating area as well that I think will probably be, outside the curing disease and physical ailments for people, being able to enhance people so that they can do more. And I think that'll be a huge driving factor too, in terms of this becoming a market at some point and people wanting to put dollars down. It's one thing to say, I want my baby to be blonde with purple eyes and all these cool features, but not just look good, but also, feel good at the same time. The implications on sports will be incredibly problematic, I think.
The superhuman Olympics.
And these like NFL caliber kids just running people over in high school just sounds terrifying. But also is fun to kind of speculate on, maybe how that can help us, later in life, being better predisposed to handle heat or extreme colds, being able to go longer without having to eat, or having to consume water, like better water retention in our cells. Maybe could allow us to actually explore different environments, even on Earth, that are very sparsely populated at most, like in northern part of Canada or Siberia in Russia, places that are just not inhabitable for people, for a lot of physical reasons that maybe we could overcome at some point. What do you think?
I mean, I don't know. My question always with this stuff comes back to consent, and not in like, are we in a place to, certainly like an unborn child or yet to be conceived child cannot give consent to choose to be here on this planet, let alone agree to become 8 feet tall and have a fully hairy body to live in the northern colonies or whatever, you're choosing to do. I wonder if this will play out in a way that there will be an incremental step, which we're already seeing now under the auspices of, again, biohacking. Perhaps biohacking for adults or people over a certain age. And again, there's sort of like a confluence of things here. You might see this in the biohacking longevity community. We might see it even with the transgender debate, right? For me, I just frame that as like, do people have the right to put chemical like hormones in their body to change their body? That's what that is. Or get surgeries to change their body, and of course there's all this like sociocultural belief system around that. But yet, meanwhile, in parallel, there are communities where they're saying it's completely okay to take 100 supplements per day and do all these procedures and stuff to overcome death, right? So in my mind, the way I categorize things, perhaps a little too reductionist in like augmenting your body, same thing. So I think we'll see a lot of like the questions we're asking here. If it's like, should you choose your eye color? Well, there's plenty of people now already like doing these crazy laser surgeries, or perhaps there will be a surgery of a gene editing, or what is it, splicing with a vector. I don't know. I remember this from genetics class, but basically, wouldn't that be mRNA or something similar, where you have some sort of vector or virus where you can then go in and edit a gene? I
We're
don't think
already doing that with certain vaccines and certain types of medical treatments as well. So
exactly. So if we have that, I think it would be much more likely that people, like an adult, would be like, I want to change this attribute, or I want to use this vaccine to upgrade my intelligence, or this vaccine to stop my hair from going gray. It's not going gray yet, but I don't know. Like, I feel like these people, I see a lot of this on the internet of like reversing this. Though I think because of the area, it's such a gray area and ambiguous thing, children, right? And there are already, again, this sort of a different kind of vector, which is reproductive technologies coming into play and becoming more and more accessible and normalized, or even essential, because of perhaps some of these like fertility issues at scale. For sure, the technology is already there to test embryos and to get some of this information. It's illegal, at least in the United States, to do things like select eye color, though I know from, let's say, like my Silicon Valley days, there are places that do this already, and there are people who make these decisions. It's not really above board, but when you're saying that the technology exists to test and have this data, then of course someone can do what they want with that genetic code. And countries some are trying to more heavily regulate it. I tend to think when something's possible, the cat's out of the bag. I think once things become more accessible or open sourced, or different companies or software or even AI allows us to become our own, experimenters, people will probably do this on their own and try to do certain things. So it's almost more of like, are these questions, will they be at the societal or policy or regulatory level at all? Or are we moving into a world where, because of access to information, whether that's, again, this genetic data or powerful tools like artificial intelligence, machine learning, like language models, which plenty of people are already using for medical journeys. I mean, I was very reluctant to do this, and I actually had like a lot of like tests and stuff like that in this past year. And I kind of like inputted and made my own little system to input all this disparate information and lab results and whatever. And it was super helpful. Did I like double check it and have a doctor? Yes. But, we're in this time where people have that autonomy. I wouldn't be surprised if they start making individual decisions like they are, or going to places where essentially human experimentation can occur in these kind of different environments outside of the regulatory you know, like a country, right? And I have opinions maybe not so favorable about that. Like, what happens if you're on some random island off of Honduras, let's just say, because there are a few over there. Nothing against Honduras. I'm just saying those communities. And like you're doing all this crazy stuff. And then like you do create something problematic, like, you know, like a lab leak where you end up with like some disease, or again, there's like those three arms that you're talking about,
We create
or
a
something.
monster, and then we have to call in the Avengers. And
yeah, we've created.
I mean, movies and TV shows have been made about this. Like,
yeah, like we're going to self-select for sociopathy because we don't really want those messy emotions to come into play, and we want like 160 IQ or above minimum, and they're gonna go. And yes, they should also be 10 feet tall. Or let's say 7 feet tall. That's probably more within the realm of possibility.
I don't know if I want to be 7 feet tall. I mean, and then you have this issue of like, I'm not going to be able to fit on the plane. I'm going to have to buy 2 seats. I'm going to have to sit first class. Like,
yeah. Well, I
like,
think
first world problems.
with all those really other unique possibilities like high IQ and sociopathy, I think you would be beyond flying commercial. You just have your own perfectly fitted jet.
True. If I could afford all that, I guess I just
yeah. You'd be like, what with these people? I'm a foot taller than most of them. You know, it's again, it's I try to be whimsical with these things, but and I also don't want to be like a doomer that says this is all the terrible like things that can occur. We should really slow down and think about it. As with everything that's happening right now on any level of technological possibility, we should at least have these conversations and ask, and not be afraid to be imaginative in order to ask these kind of crazy questions. Because how else do we anticipate what we need to build or not build, or at least the safeguards to put in place? This, like most things, I can confidently say is happening and will happen. So it's not a question of should we stop it? I mean, we have you know, we all have our individual opinions of whether we want to see something like this manifest into the world or not. But I tend to think that once things start moving into the public domain, they're likely going to happen, whether it's in a country that you live in or not. There will be another one doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if people are doing LASIK, of course people are going to want to change their eye color at some point. If people are already doing different augmentations to, you know, fix male pattern baldness, of course they're going to want to be predispositioned to have great looking, luscious hair every single day. I think these are, you know, things people will do within the cosmetics industry pretty quickly, and I think will actually become very standard and will extend to children, just because we'll want our children to have good traits. It also kind of, you know, breaches on that moral side of it. Like, they're not getting a chance to consent. I didn't get a chance to consent to be alive. I'm grateful to be alive. A lot of people will get to be alive, and you know, I'm like you, like we're one in like a trillion chance to be alive. Like the I don't know what is like 11 trillion something. Like
it's crazy.
Everyone's a miracle. So in terms of like these enhancements and stuff, I don't know. Maybe a baby coming into that kind of a world would just accept that is the world that it's coming into, and it's the reality. But I know there's a lot of children out there that ended up having a lot of problems in life because of poor decisions maybe their parents made as well. And I know that affects their dynamics with their parents. So now what if they're being augmented in all these different ways, and at the same time they're growing in a test tube in a lab, and they're not even in the mother's womb, and they don't even have that maternal connection with the mom and the paternal connection with the dad, the destruction of the nuclear family. I mean, those are other, you know, things to consider as well. But it's not that we shouldn't explore these routes either. Einstein, I think, best said that great science is not just finding answers and solutions, but asking better questions. Mm-hmm. And so a better question would be, is this something that is necessary for our human evolution, for us to continue into the future? Is there a reason for us to need to do this? The singularity seems to be approaching pretty quickly. Do we need to have a level up in our cognitive intelligence to keep up with everything? If a meteor strikes and we need to be able to survive a change in our environment, or we need to live on a different planet, let's say Elon builds a city in 2050 like he plans, wouldn't it be better to give our children predisposed abilities to exist in those types of environments in case a disaster were to happen, or in case there was a chance to explore in a different environment or a different world? I think it's just, how do we want to frame this? I think this is going to be something, again, for debate, because there's all these reasons for why maybe we shouldn't do it, and the problems it could have, and the disconnections it could have with children and their families, and what that could mean for society in a social setting. But at the same time, we're already doing stuff to try and enhance our children. Like, we eat certain foods on purpose to make our children develop better. We take certain medications to make sure that the child is born correctly and the mother doesn't die in childbirth, or that certain, terrible outcomes don't happen. So it's not that we aren't already doing those things. And then even afterwards, we're still modifying ourselves. I mean, for goodness sake, we're putting chips in our head now. So I don't think it's out of the realm of, not being able to talk about doing this stuff. I definitely think, we will do it regardless. But, I think at the end of the day, it will be just up to a family, or even a single individual, now that you can create gametes and embryos in a lab, if they want to do this. So I think just having more information is, the best thing as people make these decisions, as they become commercially available.
Yeah. Again, there's so many directions there of,
let me ask you this. What do you think about, just to simplify that one a little more, what do you think about the family dynamic?
Yeah, I mean,
because I think that's an important one from a social aspect that could be disrupted.
So that was actually one of my favorite chapters, the most provocative chapter, many of them in the book I wrote, but there's a chapter on sex, love, and relationships, and everyone's like, ooh, spicy. I want to read that one. And it's like not salacious at all. But I mean, again, as I mentioned, I try not to insert too much. On one hand, I do share a lot about my personal life or personal journeys, sometimes publicly, sometimes on stage. Other times I don't, but we all come from different perspectives and experiences that do inform things. I personally, I'm kind of at odds with the whole thing within myself, because on one hand, I believe the nuclear family and two parents, a man and a woman, is the ideal dynamic. And it was kind of engineered as such, right? It works. That's how creation and reproduction works in mammals and others, and on one hand, though, in my personal life, that's not something that, because of my sexuality, is going to happen. And something that I personally have felt truthfully at odds on every possible level, not like in a self-loathing perspective, but more like there are things that you can look at and say, this is probably the most ideal scenario for society at large. You can also make room for other possibilities and understand that if it doesn't fit into that perfectly like optimal ideal thing, there's also other arrangements or structures that we will probably see in the present, in the future, that can be different, but also beautiful in their own way, and perhaps even healthy or whatever, because again, these things are changing. Do I think that taking that so far on the other end of the spectrum, though, because I have met people now that are, let's say, examples of people exploring doing this on their own, or like gay couples or lesbian couples, or let's say gay couples who need a surrogate, where now you're talking about that mother not being in the picture, or let's say they remove the surrogate altogether from this process, and we start using these outsourced pig embryo, whatever they're making them out of, right? Like a pig uterus. I don't even know. It'll be a robot uterus soon. What does that do to the future child that was grown in like the robot versus the one that was grown connected to a mother, a woman, everything that goes into that magical experience. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. I'm just saying that, you're seeing that happen. And then other arrangements where, let's say on the far end of the spectrum, a woman who might choose to do this on her own now saying, oh, this study says that I don't even need a man or a sperm donor. I'm going to just take two of me, which, oh my goodness, like God forbid, 2x of Samrad in this world, not saying, I mean, I just, I would not
double
do something
Sam, double rad.
that it's too much rad for anyone. And I think like from a genetic diversity perspective, that is just simply not healthy. You would end up many generations later with probably some issues with that, no matter how hard you try. Like I, do like dogs a lot. I really like dog breeds. Not in like, again, a weird way. Whenever I tell people this, they're like, in a weird way, like eugenicists, like, no, I just like, it's cool. It's cool to see all this difference in selection, but you can see that over time, especially with some breeds that were overly engineered, where there are genetic problems and diseases, or the lifespan of many breeds has been shortened significantly, and you need to mix it up a bit.
Domestication has done a lot of problems to the canine.
It is, and that's why you end up with these kind of mixed breed dogs that live substantially longer, or whatever. Again, I'm not trying to take this in that direction. Even talking about dog breeds these days, I'm like, is this too provocative? Like I can't, but it's something that we don't really think about a lot. So again, it's a long-winded way of responding to say, I think we will see, and we should see, different arrangements of family units, perhaps not in a way where it's the majority. I don't think it ever will be. I think a healthy majority is still a heterosexual, or man and a woman, whatever. It doesn't have to be like related to that. You could just be like a man and a woman and doing that together. But like, that seems like a foundational unit in society in some respects. And also not like some of these newer things that are coming out from like the manosphere, that is like man with 8 concubines, a la some of these thought leaders that are like, have all your women. I don't think that's like that's a bit medieval in terms of that thought process. But again, are there different arrangements and groups of people? Yes, they do exist. And I don't think we should like marginalize them or make them feel bad. I just don't think that it really becomes I don't want to see a majority. I don't think anyone does, where all babies are created through IVF by requirement or by law. I don't want to see a world where every couple cannot conceive naturally, because we now have new things where you have to like test everything. And if you've got something wrong, which I heard recently, this happened to like a couple, like a married couple, where they did genetic testing, and they were kind of forced into, they said forced, but I'm like, were you forced or you made a decision? Because there was a high chance that something could happen. I don't want to see that being the dominant. And I think it's very likely it could. So then what happens to, again, do we start seeing these, does genetic editing become more dominant, like more commonplace than the alternative? Like, does natural anything become insane and ostracized in society? And then what happens to a family unit when you don't really need to be a unit for any part of this process? Does everything go haywire in society? Do people not cohabitate or get married, or all these things that were kind of structures that are either religious structures, like kind of like in that perspective, like they are like divine unions, or they've become legal structures as well, or social structures. But do we move past that? And is that Like what does that
Yeah.
look like?
One of the biggest benefits of the nuclear family is the social constructs that are instilled into the children from both the mother and the father. The father being able to generally teach really good life skills to a child, while the mother being able to teach emotional empathy and responsibility, and each being able to build a child up to embrace society in the proper way and to understand morals, and understand hard work, to understand community, all these things that would become absent if there was no family unit to provide that. Even having siblings, there's lots of studies done on how when you have a single child in a family versus children that grow up with siblings, and that dynamic as well, and how that helps a child develop, and it gives certain children different traits that maybe make them more prone to be a leader in society, or better working as a team. Others may be better at being intuitive and being more inclined to discovery in the sciences and creativity. So not having any of that around, if that was completely absent, again, your child is growing up in a test tube in a lab somewhere. I do worry a little bit about those dynamics falling apart. Have you ever seen Pokemon? It sounds silly,
Like
but this
a
will go
movie?
somewhere. Yeah, Pokemon the movie, the first
Probably,
one.
yeah.
Um, the first Pokemon movie was about Mew and Mewtwo, and
Mhm.
they genetically modified a fossil from the first original Pokemon Mew to create a genetically enhanced Pokemon called Mewtwo. And there was a whole intro scene that they cut out of the movie because it was too intense for children. And they later put back into the movie for when you would digitally order copies. And it went through this whole backstory because Mewtwo went through this like whole identity crisis and everything, and then like tried to destroy the world. And but there was no like pre-context to why he mentally, formed that in his head. And what ended up happening is throughout the development, they grew the little Mewtwo into a full-grown adult Pokemon. But as a child in a test tube, it wasn't born, but its mental faculties were working. So it was consciously alive, like in this dream state. And they used AI to try and train the social constructs into Mewtwo, being absent and not having parents and not having, that kind of nuclear family or anything to like really help it grow and learn over time through its environment. It's like skipping all these steps. You're growing it from embryo and conception all the way to adulthood. So it's going to be born with a completely blank slate for a mind unless you teach it something. And so what ended up happening is there was a breakdown in the lab, and the AI dissolved and fell apart, and all these constructs it was being taught turned into negative constructs and like warped its mind. And it learned that it was in a lab this whole time, and that its creators had no beneficial purpose for it to be alive, and it went through this whole identity crisis, and tried to destroy the whole world. Some really deep Pokemon stuff for people there, but
Mewtwo is my favorite, both of them, the psychic ones, but I didn't know that backstory. maybe not my favorite, but
it's a little intense. Like it was pretty dark a little bit to watch some of it, like the first 10-15 minutes of the movie, like they just completely cut it out. When you go back and watch it and you kind of apply it to a topic like this, it kind of makes sense. If you're growing your super baby to fruition, maybe you're not even just growing the baby to be a baby and then having it born. Maybe you're growing it to be a toddler first, or to be like 5, 6, 7 years old. Like I don't know like how long you're going to leave it in the tube, but everything that it does not get to experience with the mother, with the father, with the family, any of those social constructs that are supposed to be instilled, what is that test tube baby going to think and feel once it's alive? If it has like an identity crisis, like is that just going to be making it more predisposed to depression, or to having sociopathic traits at some point because it feels disconnected from society? Should we have a whole separate segment of society for super babies to help them?
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, there's no social element existing for a designer baby. You know, if it goes beyond the infancy stage and there isn't like a complete family unit there, even if there's just one parent, where are those social elements being instilled into the child? And do you need to have a whole separate section of society for these super babies to grow up so that they can learn these things? Because they're going to experience the world very differently.
You know, yeah, I mean, on all of those points, the social conditioning or growth that occurs with the nurturing of humans and caretakers. I mean, babies need that to survive. Um, you know, you can look at research in orphanages and places where children have been neglected and they die. You know, it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that makes me think when you mentioned siblings as well, is like, if people are creating babies out of just one person, I mean, like, do siblings even exist? And do they have the, beyond just the nuclear family throughout history, when we've seen things like family dynasties, which maybe were not the best or worst scenario, or even like, let's say, um, like from my experience, my family is very close. And there's a lot of us, not just in the immediate one, but like the family outside of it. And some of them were, you know, family business and business together. And for me, it's probably my top value in life. And there's something that, again, as they would say, kind of um, the trust or loyalty to blood, right? Which in
Mm-hmm.
history, this is something that like wars were fought over, or people would
Mm-hmm.
marry people for alliances, and they would reproduce for the sake of
They would marry
statecraft.
within their own family too,
Yeah,
just to
well,
keep the
that,
bloodline alive.
yeah, there's some of those, and then there's some of those where they were like, let's, you know, send the daughter off to another country and produce heirs over there. You know, there is something there, and I'm not saying every family unit is healthy. I mean, we all know there are things, it's not just like because
Mm-hmm.
you're blood that this is going to work, but there is something there that on the base level, where, you know, what happens where that framework, starting with nuclear family, but like, let's just throw that out for a second, where like these other arrangements we could say are still family, right? Like kind of collective groups of people related. But what if it goes farther between, you know, something that this is actually really attacking the family unit, however the family unit looks, just again for the interests of being inclusive to other possibilities? That's very dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got a lot of people then out there in this Mewtwo character, that if you feel disconnected, isolated, or like you don't have that connection, whether a connection to a biological mother. I mean, that to me is maybe because I'm a woman, and so I've got like the woman drive in a different way, that is sort of like, I couldn't fathom um, making a decision, like a conscious decision to say, like, if you're able to create life, you've got this like incredible, I mean, both people can create life, but like grow a life. Why would you choose not to do that and go like find this alternative, you know, in the future hypothetical scenario? But people are already making these choices for, let's say, surrogacy, and not for physical health reasons. You know, there are plenty of
Mm-hmm.
examples of celebrities and that are just choosing because they are working, that they don't want to deal with that. Um, Again, to each their own. This is not like the ethics hour, but it's something that when looking at trends about the future and seeing little signals everywhere, whether they are, again, like sociocultural trends, technological trends, what we're seeing right now is, of course, there's technology to do lots of different things. You know, grow babies outside of a womb, in an artificial womb, or someone else, you know, something else, edit genes. This is here. We see sociocultural things starting to happen, whether that's augmenting adult bodies through different methods, or, you know, choosing these different approaches. So again, for me, it feels like it's what will be the second order or third order effects on families and society. And is there trust Do we have like
Mhm.
brotherhood and sisterhood and all the things that come with these ideas, or do we just become like blockchain based transactional, not to bring in that, but like does it become completely like losing that touch in sort of this dystopian w- way where
I can
everything.
see the super baby uprising already. My designer baby brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like the kind of crazy stuff that you hear about, like, again, rumors or declassified stuff of different programs. It's like, one, it's we have these questions also on our show notes to discuss around like who does this, who has access to it to begin with.
Mhm.
So really, who are those super babies and where are they coming from? Where do they live? Is it a question of socioeconomic privilege and access? And is there something that then happens where there are like the super babies that are superior in certain ways, or at least the way that society at the time defines what superior is? Do we see kind of a um, new type of social segregation that is beyond what we've seen in the past, which was largely around things like physical or cognitive attributes, but is it taken to an extreme level, and is there a greater
Mhm.
um, gap,
I just
or is
I
it
just
something?
hope that it's not done for the sake of money or fame or attention, because I could see a lot of people out there that may want to have a designer baby that has the predisposed traits of Michael Phelps to be a Olympic swimmer, so the baby can win gold medals and earn sponsorships and provide the family with a good life and money at some point, which happens in different ways already, and happens a lot in the sporting world. But just I can't imagine the identity crisis of a child being born and its purpose being told to do one thing. It's like that Rick and Morty episode with the little robot on the table,
Mm,
and
eh,
it's like what can I do? And it's like pass the butter, and it's like what is my purpose? To pass butter, and it's like my purpose is only to pass butter. um, you know, I could see a lot of problems there. Again, it comes back to the social construct side, but like, being a human, you don't want to be born to have a designed purpose necessarily either. And the great part about life is being able to have choice. And it would suck if I grew up in life and I was predisposed to be a great Olympic swimmer and had all these characteristics, but in reality, I just wanted to be a podcaster. It would be so weird to mentally wrap my head around that. And I'd feel so, I think, unloved and disconnected. And I just see that becoming a problem one day. Like if we really commercialize it and let people pay to do these things, it's one thing to change eye color or, you know, try and weed out a certain disease. But when we get into like really designing a designer baby, um, we're almost like defining the purpose of the baby too. And that's just an area that concerns me a little bit. Um, just to kind of wrap up that topic.
or we get rid of any of these different distinctions. There's a Dr. Seuss book. It was my favorite. I took it down from my wall when I had an office because it kind of looked a little actually like it might have been Holocausty. So basically, have you heard of this book? I didn't know. Like as a kid, you're not like, why do everyone
Sure.
have stars on them? So there are these Sneetches. They look like bird-like human, Dr. Seussy characters, and there are Sneetches that um, are plain, and there are
Hmm.
Sneetches, the star belly Sneetches, that have a
Hmm.
star on their belly. Now, the star belly Sneetches are, of course, the better one. I'm not going to recite the book. I would see if I remember it, but they have all the fun and cook hot dogs on the beach, like good parties. And some guy shows up to town, a capitalist, industrialist, and he's got some machine. And he
Hmm.
goes to the plain belly Sneetches and he goes, "Come into my machine. I can turn you into a star belly Sneetch." So they go through the thing and they come out with the star. And then they go to hang out with the other Sneetches, and they're like, they're like, "Oh my goodness, our stars are no longer make us superior. So then the guy comes with a machine that removes stars. So then the actual star belly sneeches go through the machine to remove stars, and it becomes a whole mess. And ultimately, they all realize that they can all cook food on the beach together and have a very kumbaya experience. Like, we're all just sneeches. I loved this one as a kid. I don't know. It was just, maybe I was like a burgeoning capitalist myself. I was just like, you know, what a crazy, so simple story. You know, there's always going to be someone creating a problem, then a solution, then a problem. I mean, that's progress, right? That's human. That's evolutionary progress in society. We invent something, causes problems. We invent something new. But, you know, I think that by creating super babies, right, it just raises then the standard of expectations. And at a certain point, let's say enough people are manipulated, right, into thinking, I'm going to create the next Olympian. Then you have basically skill inflation at that point, where you're like, everyone has the wingspan of Michael Phelps, like a 6-foot wingspan with like sort of webbed fingers, and this and that.
I want webbed fingers. That'd be kind of cool.
I don't know. Like, and you have so many where that's no longer special. So either the standards increase and you're competing on new things, or it turns into this Sneetches scenario where those super babies, as you said, there's like an uprising where they're like, I don't want to be a swimmer. I want to like climb trees, but your webbed hands can't grip them. And so you're like, oh no, this is so terrible. You know, so it might be something where there's almost like a flattening effect, not so much where there's like a social stratification where there's superior babies. There could be things on the level, again, of cognition or some of these other enhancements, which we already see with biohacking and such, of people trying to reach like superior productivity. But when we have tools that can outperform that, whether that's robotics that can outperform anything a human body could, or whether that's artificial intelligence that could outperform, like we, you know, cross the threshold of the singularity. Do any of these things, I mean, maybe we do need to do these things to compete, but I almost wonder if it becomes something that's actually more commonplace in all of society as opposed to a privileged thing, or it becomes something that actually is more like put on the masses for these certain skill sets. And again, not in a way that I would ever advocate for, but in a way that I would probably anticipate how this would go. And there will be a small subset of Luddite people who are like, no way into any of this, which would be also interesting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. One, Dr. Seuss has a lot of very questionable books, such as If I Ran the Zoo, and To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. So he's definitely kind of walked a fine line here and there.
I know. As a kid, you know, you don't like a lot of things in our culture.
You don't,
I'm not
you don't pick up on it as a kid, but as you get older, you're like, did he really write that?
Yeah. Again, I had this like sort of signed first edition thing from that book. It was just like, oh, I liked this book as a kid. And I'm like looking at the picture and it's like a machine and there's people going into a machine, there's stars. I'm like, I just don't think this is, I'm now interpreting this differently beyond just like what I think the book was meant to do. But again, a lot of provocative ideas, which this topic, again, it's almost too difficult to discuss, but needs to be discussed in a way that we are not really, you know, even I can feel myself with this be a little bit censored. I'm like, you know, kind of going around what I think there is a line here. The question is where the line is. Is the line like, don't do this at all? Did we already cross the line? You know, are there things that now people are kind of fighting against as it relates to, as we discussed, like family unit or reproductive technologies? Is that already crossing it? And then, or is it a slippery slope to some of this other stuff that next thing you know, we wake up in 5 to 10 years and there's a baby farm. Sorry,
Yeah,
I mean,
you're imagining that in my mind.
I was trying to give like a sound bite, like a mic drop sound bite right there, but that's the baby farm. I mean, that's terrifying.
It's terrifying and awful to think about.
Oh my goodness, I would definitely in that future be branded as some sort of radical to play
God, it makes
the
me
name.
feel
I would
bad.
go
The fact that we
rescue
do
them.
that with dogs now, like my dog is at a trainer right now. She's getting reconditioned some of her like commands and stuff, and like she's a service dog, so
Yeah.
I need to keep her up to par with that so she can behave in public properly and all that. And they're great people and they have so many dogs, and it just sometimes it makes me feel bad. Like people go there and they're like, they look at all the dogs and they pick the one they like the most. I'm like, what about the other poor dogs that didn't get picked? Like this is so cruel. Like what if this was done for humans? You have all these designer babies in a pin and everyone's like, I like this one the most. This one looks the most intellectual. This one looks the most gorgeous baby, or this baby can walk already. I want that one. Or I don't know.
Yeah.
Baby farm.
No, I mean, I've been through that. Also, my past dog, I did the service training with him, and the trainers were a German Shepherd group. He wasn't, but all of the police dogs and stuff. And yeah, I mean, you'll select them very early. You can tell. I mean, actually, you select them at the point of genetics, right? They're working lines that are more stable for that type of work, and then select them behaviorally. So yes, again, we do this with animals. We do this with plants. There are commercial interests around certain things. The question, at least in the case of a dog or service dog, they get to be if they don't make the cut, they get to be of service as a happy pet. But yeah, I mean, you could imagine that type of thing, which we do sort of already have systems in society that do these types of selections, whether that was the education system, right, or like these different gates that you make it through to get to different levels of either access to parts of society or opportunities. And some of that are based around, let's say, athletics or cognitive abilities. Testing, we test these things, right? It's not like we're directly testing IQ, but standardized tests do have some elements of this. But I wonder, especially now that the talk around IQ again, which really this is something that is like will trigger me just because it's so fun. And I actually think that there needs to be new forms of thinking about intelligence beyond pattern recognition in the society that we're going into, like a post-singularity world. But anyways, like I think it's fully within the realm of possibility that people would be measuring this stuff or trying to find it, in the genetic level and selecting or augmenting these things.
Yeah.
And putting baby farm of like mind soldiers or something. And then
I wouldn't put it past humans one day. I mean, it feels like every technology, there's very few I can really think of that haven't advanced fully. I mean, if a human can, it'll do it in a van, it'll do it with a man, it'll do it with a baby that has a tan, like in Dr. Seuss true fashion. Humans are very curious and explorative, and every time there's a new technology, we really do push it to the limit. I mean, again, I can't really think of a technology that we haven't pushed until we have a technology that can supplant it. So I don't see why we wouldn't, unfortunately or fortunately, keep going this direction anyways. I hope it doesn't end up with a baby farm in any sense. But I mean, in terms of progressing down this route of designing these super babies, these children with these predisposed traits for the world or for society or for intellectual purposes or whatever it may be, it's going to happen. It's going to happen no matter what, whether we like it or not. It's just a matter of like, how does that go down in history? And, is it used in the proper ways? Is it commercialized? Is it used for evil? Is it used for good purposes? I mean, there's different ways to look at it. It's a very open-ended topic. People could use CRISPR to modify female babies so that they're more predisposed to have children in the future naturally from birth. I mean, there's things that could be done to actually promote some of those things that are becoming problematic over time. Or to make humans more fertile so that they don't have to have test tube babies and that they can have more children and not have all the negative side effects that come with it. It's another possibility. Like it's just in whose hands is this in and what direction do they choose to take it? Because it's not like everyone's going to be doing this at home, like build a robot and then they send it in and boom, there's your baby in a few months, accelerated like in Star Wars. Again, it's who has these tools and who has the resources and who's going to be the one kind of controlling the outcome for all this. And what are they going to allow for? That's again where government will come in with regulation and ways to, I think, lay a groundwork for how we go about doing this. And that's something that as a society, we're just going to have to, really advocate for. So we're not going to stop the technology. Again, it's just how, again, we are allowed to go about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, again, a period, there's always a gray area with any new technology that exists outside of the regulatory environment. And there are plenty of enterprising individuals that blaze the trails ahead in what could be considered illegal, right? In every industry. And I'm like a bit more conservative in these. I don't know. I think the reason I'm like not in jail, just to call it that, having made it in through some precarious industries on the fringe of stuff, like many people, you are presented with these gray areas. And I think on one hand, it's great that there are trailblazers. On other hands, there are maybe some areas we probably shouldn't be doing, looking to these trailblazers. I'd say we're probably a few years away. Okay, one, the technology is here now. So not to say we're a few years away. It's fully possible to, when you're sitting here saying, well, will parents choose their baby's eye color? Well, possible today. Are people doing it? I can't tell you for sure in terms of publicly available data in the United States. Can I speculate that people have been doing this for some time? Yes. And are there conferences that are happening this month, even on the fringe of these topics, where people in that community, bioengineering community, for example, where, beyond futurists, like some of the top scientists and thinkers presenting stuff on stages, beyond reports that are far beyond things we've discussed today, then yes, it's occurring. Is it occurring for any people like us? I don't know. Maybe maybe you know the right people. I mean, but it's right. I think with anything, you have enough access, you have enough capital, you have enough money, doors open to things for you. So, it's not, again, a question. I'd say for the mainstream, this could be very well the last couple of years before people are not having access to some form of editing or making decisions about their future children. I'll just call it that. I don't know what those decisions will be, or if we'll be like, okay, you have the choice to eliminate for the low price of $10,000, you can eliminate future genetic diseases, this kind of stuff. And we're probably the last generation to, I wouldn't say the last to be like, have the dominant way of doing things, the natural way that we've been doing as human beings since we got here doing that, right? But it's something to think about when you have thinkers saying that the singularity is close or could happen in our lifetime, or there are people, again, I don't know if I believe this claim, that are trying to do away with death altogether. Mm-hmm. Saying, but at least we're getting to a point, if you're alive in the next 5-10 years, that you are going to live much longer than you would have lived today, right? We're extending lifespans, probably extending the fertility window, or there are in parallel technologies where, like, again, we might be the last generation where these topics are not commonplace. And that's a really big question. And again, going back to when we had talked about like the makeup of society, what is the role of all of these different structures we've had, or families or family units? Like, it's, to me, I don't really want to think about it, but I have, for our jobs, we have to like think ahead and imagine that world in sort of like a both dystopian and utopian science fiction. I don't know. Like, I think it's, again, I can say for sure, in some countries it's happening. For sure, even within, let's say, the United States, to some groups, absolutely. There are things that happen in the regulatory gray area. I don't know what things, but like, for sure, choosing eye color or physical attributes, probably some cognitive ones. It would be hard for me. I'm speculating at this point, but it just seems that if the technology is there, and if, again, the futurists and the fringe people are already like 20 years ahead talking about other stuff, then that's probably already here too. So,
I mean, we weren't talking about this stuff 20 years ago, not in a commonplace conversation. I mean, not even 10 years ago. Like, this is like, again, very brand new stuff. In 10 years, maybe this is irrelevant. Maybe it's completely commonplace in society, or maybe in 20 years, there's some other technological development that supersedes this need to have designer babies. Maybe we all have robot children. I don't know. To cap off this episode, I think it'd be great to speculate on the question of what the future of this is going to look like. Because there's a lot of directions this can go. There's a lot of things that we could do with super babies, and even beyond super babies, but just genetic modification in general, where that could take us and our children, or even ourselves, when it comes to immunity and longevity, physical traits, enhancements, biological disorders and disease. There's, again, so many different areas. Final thoughts, I'll give mine too, but also from you, on where you think this may take us down the line. And this can be a little science fiction too, because science fiction is starting to become a little bit more reality these days. So it's not that far off. But I mean, in your opinion, where some areas do you think this could evolve into?
I mean, you could rattle off infinite things, starting with some of the earliest stories when we had talked about religious things. I think there's a lot of good stuff in that original book. When I'm like, oh, we'll probably have people that are like 500 years old with like 60 kids, which, you're like, was that an exaggeration? If you're living longer and we have these tools to enhance or change things, I think there could be elements where there's, again, like the traditional structure of like parents or individuals just having more kids, or almost collecting them like their children's zoo of like, or a video game, and this is detached in some sort of way. There could be a breakdown of the nuclear family or family units in favor of something that is a bit more like the baby farm, production line babies that are born with certain pre-selected attributes and placed with caretakers or families or corporate caretakers. I mean, this is super dystopian. I'm now just literally creating science fiction, or probably something that already exists from some sort of book or movie. But nothing could happen, right? In the ideal scenario is we have like a good regulatory global governance system, where it's hard for me to imagine that in a multipolar world that we're in right now, where, you could say, let's say like an alliance of nations says, we're going to keep this as natural as possible, but we will allow for certain things related to genetic diseases. Meanwhile, there's another superpower out there being like, screw that. We're going to create like all these super babies that are our communist army or something, hypothetically, of course. I'm not speaking from any sort of truth, but like, right. Then what do you do, right? This is the same question with AI. Is it like, do we need to catch up, but do it in a slightly better way? Or like you said, we can have like create biohybrids or robots or things that are synthetic that have elements of human biology or consciousness, but are not held back by human biological processes. And so reproduction is either obsolete, or there could be like a hiatus on reproduction because people are like, we have enough people on this planet. We're all living to 500 years old now. I mean, that's very science fiction, all of it. I think within our lifetime, it's probably going to be super simple stuff, like at a level of access or socioeconomic status, you'll be able to create or select for the healthiest embryo, and probably have some choices around things like sex, biological sex, whatever, eye color, hair color, this stuff, which is also a little controversial. Probably stuff if we figure out cognitive ability and removing illness, or predisposition at least to disease. And we might accidentally create some problems in the midst of doing that. But I think that's the most likely middle path. And that alone is already provocative enough. It's going to create a lot of discord in society, as we talked about earlier in the episode. Even a topic that seems as simple as what is a family unit? What is the ideal family unit? Starts to be challenged in these things. But what do you think in your future vision?
I'm going to start from practical and work my way up to crazy.
Good.
So from a practical standpoint, I think we'll be the last generation to actually be medicated.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to get ruled out pretty quick. I wouldn't be surprised in 40, 50, 60 years, most of the people on planet Earth won't need medications because we'll just have genetic solutions to eliminate the need for a lot of them. Like we could probably get rid of our ability to catch the common cold. We could probably get rid of a lot of diseases. We could create our bodies to be more immune to certain viruses, bacterias, things that plague us all the time, and eliminate basic common medications. Might even be able to eliminate headaches. Goodbye Advil. I just think that's going to be an easy fix if we really get this right. And then I think that one could be a really good one for society. That will also lead us to live longer lives, hopefully healthier, longer lives. We've kind of talked about this on past episodes, like the benefits of longevity and if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like, would we outlive our ability to reproduce? Like, is that something we can extend as well if we're having multiple lives and living to be 200 years old? Are we going to be able to extend our mental capacity, or are we going to get dementia and be a vegetable the last 100 years of our life? I think that there's potentially solutions there as well, so that we could actually live a very long time if we want to, and see multiple ages of humanity and actually comprehend it and survive it. Because the longer you live, the rate of something happening to you goes up. So more likely to get hit by a car or some instrument if you live that long. I also think that we're going to merge with technology a lot more seamlessly. I think that if we're designing babies, why not design babies that can merge with tech better than our normal biological selves? Like, we're already putting chips into our head. Why not, engineer, if we can figure it out?
Port.
Yeah, a USB port. Or some way to natively connect. Like USB-C is pretty common practice in most technologies. Like, I'm not saying we have to have a USB-C port, but what if we could have some kind of machine to wetware interface that every human could have without it having a negative effect on the body, that we could easily tap into if we wanted to tap into the internet, or we wanted to tap into tech or robotics. We wanted to become cyborgs and augment ourselves, which we already do. It's not out of science fiction. It's just a matter of how far we want to take that as well. I think that'd be an interesting advancement that could be an easy fix with gene editing at some point, if you want a super baby to interact with technology a bit more.
I would want, so I was thinking about that earlier in the episode, and I think it could go two ways, right? My head went to like the scary Matrix way, right? Where they have these ports in the back of their head. But then there's also like the positive Avatar way. Do you remember in that movie where when they um got on, what are the creatures they ride that are like horses? I don't know. I'm not good with details, but anyways, I think if you've seen
I
the
don't remember
movie,
the name of it, but I know what you're
yeah,
talking about.
but they like plug in and it's sort of like a telepathic like connection, become one type thing. I would be down for that. That'd be kind of cool if you could also connect with other humans, right? And other organic beings, but maybe there is, like you said, some sort of wetware interface that is by choice. You have to give consent for that as well.
Yeah.
Probably more consent than other things that we do. But yeah, it
It'd
would
be
be
cool
cool.
if there's a way for us to tap into tech in that kind of a way naturally, but to also tap into biologicals in our ecosystem too. Like, what if we could genetically modify entire forests to interface with ourselves as well, and we could actually gain a better understanding of our ecological environments? I mean, it can go both ways, like this backwards compatibility maybe with our minds, so we could actually communicate with animals, our next of kin in the genetic lineup. Maybe we can talk to chimpanzees or something, or better understand how they interact, and maybe that teaches us a little bit more about the environment or different animal species or ourselves, and understand our planet a bit better. I just think there's just a way for us to connect with our world just as much as we could connect with the things that we're building. So I think that'd be an interesting, thing that maybe we could develop at some point. Starting to get crazier.
This is where now I'm into this. I'm reluctant with everything else, but I'm like, oh, if I could like handshake and everyone's just sort of like telepathic, or you can, give
Yeah,
consent
I worry
to
about, like, we're going to create this hive mind and everyone's going to be connected, and then this global AGI is going to control us all or something. And
you, the
and then
cognitive
that's
security is
Skynet right
important.
there.
It is important. I mean, it's going to happen. So we've got to learn that how do we kind of create our cognitive, or in this like weird hypothetical semi-biological telepathic whatever it is, this interface that we would need to have firewalls for that, like in some sort of way. But it would be really cool to like touch a tree and learn what it's seen over its time being there, or through its root
Yeah,
system.
I think that'd be fascinating. Just knowing that forests are scientifically proven to be alive and have their own degree of consciousness. It'd be interesting if we could tap into that one day, into the fungal roots of an entire forest, and actually learn what the Amazon is thinking, what is actually going on. Like, I don't know. I think we'd gain a deeper connection to our world. But speaking about worlds, I think the last one for me is being able to be interplanetary. It's becoming more and more of a reality. The plan by SpaceX is to send humans to Mars by 2028, if everything goes according to plan, to build a city on Mars by 2050. Some of the things are very ambitious, and I feel like we think very little about our ability to create life support, or our ability to survive in those kinds of conditions. It's not like we're just going to be able to start growing potatoes everywhere and have natural springs popping up where we can drink water and walk around and take a stroll with our dog. Like, it's going to be very harsh, very, very harsh. And most people probably won't survive. And we have to worry about things like radiation, extreme cold and heat, abrasion, a thin atmosphere that allows a lot of things in, but also does not suit us well to breathe. And terraforming is like a really out there scientific idea that would take a very long time and would be insanely expensive, and is probably nowhere near our capabilities yet. What if we could engineer ourselves to adapt to that kind of environment, or produce offspring that are more predisposed to deal with radiation, to deal with a harsher atmosphere, to actually survive with needing less water on a day-to-day basis, so that we can conserve more resources, or to be more able to handle the lack of gravitational force on Mars, which actually would deplete our bone density because it's actually less there by like 30% or something, or 30% of what Earth is, or whatever the number is. Our bones would decay very fast. Happens to astronauts all the time. So there's things that we could do to make our future designer babies a bit more adept to those environments. So I think that one is actually, even though it sounds science fiction and kind of crazy, it's not that far out there. But that's kind of where I think I see things going with this. People are going to, I think, explore a lot of different routes and avenues.
Yeah, I mean, I see it. I went on
So
a
do
walk
I.
the other day and it was 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and I was not wearing enough. I mean, I thought I was in enough clothing, and I take these long walks, and I was about 2 hours in and on the phone, and I started like slurring. I was like, oh God, goodness, I need to get inside. And I think I had minor hypothermia. It took me like 4 hours to get my body temperature back to something where I was not frigid, even in my core. So I don't know. Yeah, humans are like, we're so incredibly resilient. And then we're also so
Fragile.
Yeah. And it was a little scary just because it's something that I of course learned about this more after this happened, because I'm like Googling that there are like some points of no return where your body gets out of whack, out of homeostasis, and you can't on your own return it to a balance. And of course, all sorts of things, not just body temperature. But, you know, in that case, if we're able to create a more resilient internal system to bigger ranges of things like you mentioned, temperature or air that we're breathing, or again, the amount of nutrients we need to consume, or what types of nutrients, or how we process these things. You know, at that point, I'm like, there's a different species. But we've seen throughout history, from going back through all the different like like Homo erectus, Homo sapien, all the different like lines that never really happened. You know, you have the dominant things, at least in those perspectives. It's like, I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility to think that there would be continued splitting of human beings, right? Maybe we're at one of those evolutionary fork in the roads, and we just have the ability now to expedite it.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I think we'd have a lot of subgroups of our species. Those that are more intellectually inclined might be Homo pentium, you know, connecting with the wetware technology of the time. You know, there will be different terminology for sure, and different groups of humans that would come out of that. And I think we would have to acknowledge it in that kind of way, because they would have a specific, unique collective advantage that a normal human being like you and me would not have. So it would do them a disservice not to give them their own title, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's just, it's such a remarkable thing, or time, to even contemplate being able to imagine being on the cusp of these changes happening, and that there will be people who will perceive it. Very well, we could be people that perceive the beginnings of this. And, you know, that's like a very big deal.
Absolutely. This has been a good episode. We've covered a lot of topics. We've really dove into where super babies may go in the future. We want to know what you guys think as well. Again, this is a topic that has many different moral constraints and things that need to be discussed over time, and can be good in a lot of ways, bad in a lot of ways. So we want to know what you guys think as well. So definitely leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. And make sure to give us a follow and a subscribe, and stay tuned for the next episode, which may or may not be on, what do we talk about? Drugs. Is that a good follow-up?
I think drugs.
Let's talk about
drugs are in the news right now. Everyone's all, I mean, not. Yeah, we were kind of riffing on the concept of what would be the future of drugs, illicit or otherwise. So
drugs it is. All All right, guys. See you all in the next episode. Take care. Again, make sure to follow, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. See you all on next one.